Yeah, let's get started. My name is Ryan Cobbins, and again, I'm going to do a real quick intro to our Energize Colorado Gap Fund, and then I will introduce Rebecca, who you see on the screen, and then of course Rebecca will introduce Brian. And so we'll save a little bit of time doing a few of those intros, but just to kick things off, like I mentioned, my name is Ryan Cobbins, and I'm with the Energize Colorado Gap Fund, and I'm extremely proud and excited to bring you the Energize Community Program. And so this program provides funding readiness workshops, Gap Fund low interest loans, and an accelerator program to further your business. This program includes technical and business advisors to assist you with a broad range of issues facing our Colorado small businesses. Our low interest loan program is funding up to $20,000 with 3-year terms or 36-month terms with an interest rate of only 2.5%. Funds can be used for payroll, rent, lease payments, utilities, debt consolidation, refinancing that high interest credit card debt or high interest loan debt that you may have, working capital, equipment, inventory, and even capital improvements. This loan program is for businesses with fewer than 25 employees in 3 specific geographical areas that include Pueblo, Southwest Denver, East Colfax, and also childcare around the state. And so even though our program is specific to those 3 geographical areas, we are also bringing you an assortment of other, we'll call them funding packages that include mostly interest, but I know there may be the potential of additional grants being kicked out here down the road. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, we'll be bringing not just an assortment of workshops, but within those workshops are opportunities for you to learn more about some of the funding opportunities around the state of Colorado. And so one of the most important pieces for me, and I know this is not for everybody, but I know specifically for me, I own a business here in downtown Denver. We're going through our 12th year. One of the most beneficial pieces of the coffee shop that I own is our business plan. And what the business plan has meant for us, the opportunity and ability for us to think through this project from A to Z. And so that business plan is the focus for today's workshop. I'm ecstatic to swing it over to Rebecca Engel, who's our program director of Energize Colorado.
Thanks, Ryan, and thank you all so much for being here. One piece of not only our loan application, but a number of loan applications are building out a business plan. And so Brian Elizardi is generous enough to spend this time with us to go through the basics of business planning, starting from a business model canvas that can be used for a number of different things and then turned into a business plan. So Brian comes to us from University of Denver, has a lot of experience working with small business owners, entrepreneurs, and we're so grateful he's here. So feel free to ask your questions in chat, and we'll make sure to get to all of those, but I will turn it over to him. Thanks so much for being here, Brian.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Ryan. I'm delighted to be here. Give me a moment, team, to start my slide experience here. So thumbs up, everyone can see this. Rebecca looks good. Awesome. I am delighted to be here. I just think the world of Energize Colorado, I think it's such an important time right now for small business in the state of Colorado. And to have great organizations like Energize that are providing a level of support, care, and guidance as we all navigate these increasingly times, I just think is phenomenal. So thank you all so much for joining us and for joining Energize for this, this presentation. And we're going to be talking about the business model canvas today. A couple of goals I just want to walk through here to help organize our time and really maximize the time that you all are giving here away from your small businesses. The first of which is just to understand this idea of what does it mean to have an agile business plan. I'll introduce this topic of VUCA. It's something that's borrowed from the military, but we are living increasingly in this very VUCA world where things are increasingly being defined by how unpredictable they are. So I'll talk about why, as a business leader, it's so important to make sure that your plan is agile, and why I think the business model canvas is the way to go here. We're also going to explore, how do you begin to approach some of the business challenges in a very systematic way. This canvas model here is a great format for beginning to think and to pull apart many of the different areas of your business here into 9 different core components, these building blocks, if you will. And as a business there, be able to better analyze and sort of address all the health of your organization. And the last piece is, I know obviously this is part of the funding readiness program here. And so when it comes time to apply for those very important funding applications, I just want you to see the value here in the Canvas model and having that easy to use one-page dashboard to really organize your thoughts and to be able to kind of rattle those off here at a moment's notice. So before I dive into the actual model itself, I want to set the broader context, and I'll run through an interesting survey that came out about 2 weeks ago around small business ownership. And in many cases, some of these data points you won't need me to emphasize, because I know some of you may be experiencing this pinch very acutely. But first up is this idea that wages are going up. Companies, over 70% of the respondents from this survey stated that their wages are rising, and depending on what industry you're into, you could be feeling this extremely acutely as we see talent moving across industries right now. 71% of these business owners also anticipate that costs will continue to keep climbing. Everything from how difficult it is to secure supplies to just the increasing pressure that's being put on to be nimble in this environment, I think is really causing some stress and anxiety around cost. And then also 45% of business owners now, as a result of this, have no choice but to pass on those costs to customers, which makes it really challenging to be able to maintain status quo or to draw a profit at the end of the day. So it's all leading to this idea of Buca. And so what does Buca mean? It's a term that we borrow from the military. And so it's this idea that it's volatility, it's uncertainty, it's complexity, and it's ambiguity. And it used to be that your goal as a business leader was to think through, how do I eliminate Buca? So how do I either strengthen my business model? How do I increase the funding? How do I go after a more competitive space? How do I really secure my customer segment in a way in which I can draw down VUCA as much as possible, if not eliminate it? And I think the pandemic has really thrown that approach for a loop. I think now the response as a business owner is to say, how do I manage through VUCA? So we sort of acknowledge that this is going to be the way forward. Some people say that with the pandemic, we're on VUCA that's on steroids. And so what we're seeing now is a cycle that is routinely being defined by these 4 components. So when it comes to small business formation, I don't know if your experience reflects this, but I see oftentimes a lot of people have sort of this idea, this expectation of mine in terms of, I've got an idea, I've got a proposition, I want to put it in the marketplace, and you kind of expect it to be this walk in the park. It's a solid plan, and now all I need to do is go out and execute that. And I think the reality is that oftentimes our businesses get out in front of us very quickly, and the experience can be very nauseating. And we spend so much time in our businesses and constantly being pulled by them that we don't have a lot of time to think on them and to reflect in terms of this, is this the best practice, or is this the best way forward? And so what I'm going to, sort of address today are different ways that we can begin to sort of approach that space. If you're anything like me, chances are you have been sort of over here on this this right side, especially the last couple of months and years. And so I've seen a number of approaches to try and remedy this. The first of which is just to kind of wing it. A lot of times people associate this with the startup space, but that's not necessarily true. You have an idea, you have a concept, and you want to put it in the marketplace, and then you dynamically steer, but you haven't really thought through a lot of the complex components that are involved in what does it mean to achieve long-term sustainable success in this space. And the first time you come up on your challenge, or the need to pivot, you're often unprepared. The flip side is that, and this is actually where I see most folks sort of end up, is your business plan becomes this this huge tome, if you will, that really kind of burdens you down, and you focus so much on wanting to perfect the plan that it's not grounded in reality, and you're not able to dynamically steer based on the environment around. And so what we're really trying to sort of propose today is something that's a bit more agile. I can't promise that this is what your life is going to look like at the end of the day. But with this business model canvas approach, at least you'll begin to better understand the core components of business success. What does health look like for you as an organization? And if you're struggling in any one of these 9 areas, you'll learn how to really quickly diagnose that. And so my hope is that you can start to move to a bit more of a Zen place when you think about managing your business. Why that matters and why business plans are important is, obviously, I know that's very much tied to funding applications, but there's a great study that was out a couple of years ago that looked at this idea of the relationship between viable businesses and also the presence of a plan. So what it found was that entrepreneurs who are intentional and sit down to write formal plans are 16% more likely to achieve that viability space. So this stuff matters, and I think in this environment, I'll take 16%, every little bit I think helps at the end of the day. And so all that leads us to our topic for the day here, which is going to be the business model canvas. And it's broken down into these 9 key components. If you've never seen the canvas before, you are at least familiar with the majority of these 9 components. And in many cases, you are very dialed into maybe a couple of them. And what I want to argue for today is that you need to be thinking about all 9, and you need to be thinking about how do we put all this together into a systematic format that allows us to see at a higher level the status of our business, and to be able to diagnose individually what areas need a little bit more development, what areas require us maybe to hit or to pull off of the gas pedal, and to think about how do we balance all this out. And so you're not going to spend every single day on all these 9 components, but I do think that having a successful business canvas and having 9 components all in place is going to lead you to long-term success. So this is what all those 9 building blocks look like filled out here in the canvas. We are going to work kind of from the right to the left here today. And I actually find that's pretty beneficial. Some of this is designed a bit for the individual who's thinking more from a business formation standpoint. And I start there because I think that allows us to have a universal space to have a conversation around how do we move through some of these phases. But for you, you may have all 9 filled out, or maybe you've got 3 or 4, that are really solid. And this is an opportunity now to look at all of the key components of an effective system. So the way things will go is I will bring up each one of the key components. I'll define it for you, and then I'll provide you with some essential questions to really sort of get you thinking critically about this particular topic. And at the end, I'm going to supply you with an example. The value of this is that we'll send this out to you as a PDF, so you will have all of these key essential questions. And if there's any area that you kind of say, hey, this is one I need to spend more time on, maybe you take that one down with your team, and you can feel free to steal these questions and bring them into your next meeting to say, hey, as a team, how do we begin to address X, Y, and Z? Here are some good essential questions I've got us. So this is really intended to kind of walk you through today, a good model, and provide you with an overview, but also I want you to have a tool that you can have with you perpetually at the end of this conversation as well too. And to sort of provide you with some examples, Ryan is going to be kind of my critique here at the end because he's the actual coffee shop owner. But my example of the canvas I put together is as if I were starting a coffee shop. One of my big passions has been coffee, and with the pandemic and being locked up at home, I finally decided to crack the nut around coffee and figure out what it is about coffee that I enjoy and what is good coffee versus bad coffee. So my lifelong dream is to open up a coffee shop one day. So you'll get to see my canvas here as we move forward in my example of what my coffee shop might look like one day. So with that, we're going to start here all the way on the right, customer segments. And customer segments is all about the who involved in your business. So who are they and why would they buy from you? So that's going to be our essential question. a lot of times you'll see these pulled up into, and you may kind of be further along in this process, but sometimes people will define this or codify this in terms of, who are my archetypes or who are my personas. And so these are going to be the different groups of individuals that are going to be engaging with your product and purchasing your product. And a couple of key questions just to kind of get you thinking about who my segments are, because this piece, why I like to start with segments, is that it begins to flow now throughout the entire canvas. But starting kind of with that end user in mind, put you in that space of empathy to say, okay, who really am I going after here? What are these individuals like? What are these groups like? What do they need? And am I going to be targeting them in a very niche way or also in a mass market way is kind of one of those key differentiator questions as well. So an example of my coffee shop, the 3 segments that I'm going to be going after here are students. I want to go after freelancers as well too. So folks who are putting together kind of different work. Maybe they need a comfy space to work, but also I want to go after the coffee lover. So I don't want to be just kind of your everyday average coffee shop. I want folks who know a thing or two about coffee to come in and appreciate the space we put together. Next on, we move to value proposition, and that's all about what are you building for, and what is it all about. So these are going to be your bundles of products and services that you put together to create value for each one of those customer segments. Some essential questions to kind of get you going in this space are going to be, what exactly are you trying to achieve for each one of these groups? One question I love here is from Clayton Christensen, who is a former Harvard Business School professor. And he said, at the end of the day, that we don't buy products, we hire products to solve problems in our lives. And I think it's often kind of a really useful reframe. So an example of that he likes to give is that we don't purchase a milkshake because we want a milkshake. We hire a milkshake because we want nostalgia in our lives. And so when you think about your value proposition, what are people hiring your product, your service, your company to solve in their lives? And then what individually among each one of those segments are you using in essence to satisfy the demands and the wants and the needs and the problems that those segments are coming into your organization with? So for my individual segments, I've broken this down into 3 kind of core value propositions here. For my students, I want them to feel like they can come work. So to have a good, comfortable place where they can organize all their homework, where they can meet with other students to learn. And of course, the free Wi-Fi piece is an important, if not an essential place. Freelancers, same thing, good, comfortable place to work with, maybe some good music, some good ambiance. And then for my coffee lovers, I want to go after a good third wave coffee experience. So really making sure that there's a deep connection to my growers and that there's a good sense of awareness around how sustainable we're trying to make sure that the whole value chain around coffee is going to be. So those are my three main value propositions for my 3 main segments. Next up, we move on to channels. And so how does your product actually get into the hands of your customer segments? These are going to be your individual touch points with each one of your customer segments. And some kind of key questions to guide you here are, how specifically do you deliver your value proposition? How does that manifest into real life? How do you reach your customer segments? And what are all the channels and how are you integrating those across all the various touch points? It used to be that, companies before the 1980s were primarily single channel, and that was going to be a physical plant, and you had to go physically to a business. Now, of course, in the era of internet and virtual, there are so many different ways that we can engage with our customers, and the pressure, I think, is on to be omni-channel for a lot of organizations. But really, at the end of the day, when you've got a really good definition of who your segments are, where are the places that they're hanging out, you'll start to get a better feel for what are going to be the channels that are really important for you to spend time in, as opposed to taking the approach where I need to be everywhere all at the same time, all at once. That's just too overwhelming for a business owner. Even if you're, I think, a mature organization where you've got lots of staff, I think you still need to be thinking about, where are my customer segments hanging out and what are going to be the right ways or the right channels to reach them. So back to my coffee shop, my channels are, of course, my brick and mortar store. Maybe I want to engage people at the roasting house. So I want to bring them in, have them get tours so they can see more of that process of how the beans come in and how they get roasted and how they get shipped out, whether it's through our subscription plan or through directly back to our stores. I've got my online store. I mentioned my subscription program, so you can go online and sign up for our beans. Maybe we get every other week or every month, whatever your preference is, but we'll send those directly to your door. So that's one of our new subscription programs. And then obviously, in this era of social media, I'm going to reach you through YouTube. I'm going to reach you through Instagram. I'm going to tell the story of coffee in a very visual way, maybe help connect you with some of the growers and the folks that are intimately involved all the way at the beginning stage, so you feel that deep sense of connection to the product. After that, we have our customer relationships. And so once you've got your segments defined, you've got your channels and your value proposition, how do you get and how do you keep and then how do you grow your customers over time? And this is all about the relationship that you want to establish with your organization. And this really, in many cases, I think becomes a competitive advantage for each individual organization. There's no right way, there's no one way to do this. And for you, as you define your value proposition, that will then inform how you begin to interact and engage directly with your customers. And then how does that differ, from each customer segment to segment? This is maybe where you might go back and you revisit your customer segments because you say, you know what, it's too difficult for us to maintain all these different segments and to have a unique relationship with them. And so rather than try and be everything to everyone, we're going to try and be really top bill, for a couple of small segments here. And also, how do you communicate with them? How frequently are you doing that? How are you using those channels to achieve that? So for my coffee shop here, I'm going to have a loyalty card system, and maybe if you're a member of our online program with subscription, I'm going to give you a point system. So with each purchase, you can develop points over time. And in your online account, you can also go in and maintain your taste profile. So maybe we sent you something that you didn't like and you want to go and update that, or maybe you want to give some feedback back to the grower. This is one of our competitive advantages is that we want to encourage you to interact with us, also to provide us with important data. And that's how we're going to build a relationship with you is, by making sure that we get your feedback, we take that into consideration, and then we loop that back around to enhancing that relationship. From there, all that energy from the right side of the canvas then moves down into our revenue streams. And revenue streams is how you actually make money from your product or your service being sold to customers. And this is going to be your pricing structure, how you're actually capturing that value for each individual customer segment. Some key questions here to guide your thought process around revenue streams. Do you have multiple ways of generating revenue? I mentioned my subscription model. That's a good example. So, and what's the pricing strategy? How are you going to anchor that price competitively, maybe against the marketplace, or how are you going to do that in a way in which you're going to try and get people into the door? And then through which of your channels our customer is going to pay. If I'm on social media, in most cases, that's not going to be an area where I'm going to get direct pay through. So how do I leverage those channels to drive customers to some of those paying channels? For my coffee shop, I obviously have a lot of sale and food beverages at the shop. I'm going to send you packaged beans. Maybe I'm a coffee shop that cares a lot about my brand. So I'm going to make sure that I have branded merch so you can be around town. Repping my coffee shop and supporting that out in the is maybe I want to look at different business models. So I'm looking at franchises as well too. So these are just some examples, I think, to kind of get you thinking around your revenue streams. Chances are you've got that pretty well defined at this point, but it's also a great opportunity to think about that with each individual customer segment to say, are we reaching those segments in the best way? And are there new ways for us to maybe expand over time with new business models to generate that revenue piece? We move there over to the left side of the canvas, and this is where we have key resources. And this is just pretty much, what do you need to keep the lights on? What do you need to keep the business running? This is going to be infrastructure. This is going to be everything that you need to create, deliver, and capture value for your individual customer segments. So what specific resources do you need to be able to fulfill that value proposition on an ongoing basis? What resources do your distribution channels and revenue streams require to function? And going back to that customer relationship, so the heartbeat of your organization, what do you feel like you need in order to maintain that? For my coffee shop, obviously, I need the equipment to keep things running. Maybe this is where I need a good line of credit or a loan to get us started or to help us expand. I'm going to need my facilities, packaging, branding, and then last, but certainly not least, is going to be all the human capital involved in running and maintaining and operating that business. From there, we move into key activities. And these are going to be all the activities you need to perform in order to maintain your business and your relationship with your customers and generate your revenue. So what specific activities are those? What activities set your company apart from others? Are you trying to just mimic another at a different cost structure maybe? Or are you trying to have a different relationship altogether in a way that begins to create some separation between you and another organization? And also, how do you achieve a unique place in the market around your revenue streams, your channels, and your customer relationships? This is where I talked about the key activities piece, is where I think a lot of people get bogged down being so busy in their business right now that they don't have a lot of time to think about their business and to think on their business. And this is the area where I think you can begin to make some progress there. For my coffee shop example, I've got also, I've got my activities, my marketing, social media, all my product offerings, my supply chain management. A couple of different strategies, though, to think critically about your key activities and how you spend your time in a way that gets you out of that default setting of having to be so deeply engaged in your business, is this idea of like, how do I split my time between in the business versus on the business? In the business is obviously very clear. You're managing day to day. Maybe you're stepping in, to help fill a gap. On the business is where you start to see things at a different perspective. This is where you take time away from the day-to-day functioning to maybe set goals with your team, or maybe you begin to think more critically about how do we go after this customer segment. This is the space where you can get out of sort of that plagued mindset where I don't have the time to do this. And this is where you can create some margin around that piece. Another strategy I've seen that works very effectively in the key activity space is to split this into 3 buckets. And so what are the activities that my company needs to perform on a daily basis, and then on a weekly basis, and on a monthly basis? If you were employee number 1 for your organization, you're going to be acutely familiar with each one of these buckets. And so the hope is that you can begin to move yourself from having to be engaged and involved every single day on certain tasks to then how do I manage that on a weekly basis and a monthly basis? And so that's often, I think, a useful way to think about your activity piece, is to split those up into 3 different buckets and to say, how do I begin to extract myself from the daily and the weekly so that I can create some of that margin, that space? Next up is going to be the key partnerships that you need in order to successfully perform your business, and who are going to be the individuals and organizations that you're going to partner with in order to leverage your business model to its fullest. So what key resources do you receive from those partners? What key activities are performed by those outside partnerships? This is isolated here as its own, and I think it's really useful from splitting this up in terms of a different relationship, because oftentimes, we end up handing over our business model and the success of the business model over to a set of individuals or organization, whoever they may be, very closely tied to us, or they may be very distant, from us. And so we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of those partner relationships, because they're really critical to the success of our value proposition being brought to life. For my coffee shop example here, my key partners are going to be obviously my growers, my producers, my traders, the washers. I care very much about sustainability in my coffee shop, so my environmental partners and working with different fair trade organizations. The folks that are producing my machines, obviously, because I'm going after students and freelancers, Spotify becomes an important partner, so making sure that I've got good quality music in my space. Maybe a partner with the university to bring in, some of those segments, and obviously making sure that I've got good strong Wi-Fi is going to be a key resource that I provide. All this then funnels down on the left-hand side to my cost structure. And so this is an in-depth model of all the costs of your business model. Most folks who are, acutely involved in the accounting of their organization are going to be very familiar with this part. And so how do the key activities, the key resources contribute to your cost structure? Are you properly utilizing your economies of scale? So thinking about your margins, thinking about ways that we can scale this up. For my coffee shop example here, I have a lot of incoming costs that are obviously associated with managing that, not the least of which is going to be my lease, my rent, transportation of supplies, my employee salaries. So having all this bundled, I think, in one area allows you to isolate that out and to think through what are going to be the key elements of my cost structure. So putting it all together, now I have my dashboard here of my business model. This is great for new business startups, and this is also great, I think, if you're further along as well too, is that, this then becomes now this one sheet dashboard that I can take with me. I've met before with business owners who will literally pull this out in the meeting. And they keep this up to date, they keep this fresh, and it's a great way for them to think through comprehensively their business, but also for them to share with would-be funders, to share with people that they're looking to develop partnerships with. It's a great way, I think, to showcase to the world that you didn't just wake up one day and have an idea and want to just put it together. You actually have been extremely thoughtful about how you're approaching success as a business owner. So this now then is my dashboard that I'll take out into the world. A couple of key things here, we'll kind of wrap up. I've got a couple of different ways I want you thinking about the canvas and how we can break this apart. There's this really great way, this great model that kind of breaks the canvas up into 3 different segments. And so when you bundle all these areas together, you get this idea of desirability. So my channels, my relationships, my segments, and my value proposition, how actually desirable is that? And is it desirable enough to the point where customers are going to want that? At the bottom here, between our revenue streams and our cost structure, we've got viability. So how viable is my business? What at the end of the day is my business worth to the world? And then lastly is this idea of feasibility. And so looking at my resources, my activities, and my partners together, how feasible is my business model right now? I think this really is an area where people spent a lot of time in the pandemic and in COVID is thinking about how do I adapt? How do I pivot? How do I make sure that I maintain feasibility, in a world that is constantly changing? And so you saw a lot of expense and a lot of thought process go into that area in particular. Another good way to kind of split this up and think about it is going to be on the right-hand side, you've got all of your revenue. And this is really useful, I think, when it comes time for your funding application pieces. So this is all everything that contributes here to your revenue. And the left side is going to be all your expenses. And all my activities are drawing down into my cost structure and into my revenue streams. All right, so that is going to be the business model canvas in a very quick nutshell. Each one of these elements could easily, be a workshop in itself, of course. But my goal for today was really just to provide you with a comprehensive overview of this particular format, this model, and then also how you can begin to use it. And some of the benefits here, I think, as I mentioned already, that you've just got this really unique one-page overview of your business plan, your business model. And it allows you to see the relationship between all the pieces. Maybe in a way that because you're so deep in the business that you can't sometimes get that perspective where you can step out and see it. This one-page sheet, can really just be a great place for you to look at and to wake up and say, okay, maybe, my partners need a little bit, sort of TLC today. I'm going to spend extra time on my partner piece because, I'm not going to do this. I've seen some folks that, on a weekly or monthly basis will rank their performance 1 to 10 in each one of the 9 core areas. And then that'll inform maybe for the next month, the amount of energy and effort they need to put into that particular area. So it's a great one-page overview. It's also very easily shareable, which is nice as well too. It's great too, because it's plug and play for funding applications. So once you've got your overview, you can begin to answer questions very quickly on a lot of funding applications. You can also begin to really easily see where the gaps are. I imagine this to be like, someone that goes into the gym and, maybe you've been working really hard on one area, but you've done that at the expense of another area. And so you sit there and you say, okay, you know what, now I need to go back and build some muscle in this other area so that I can become more well-rounded as a business and make sure that I'm shoring up some of those weaknesses and creating a stronger foundation for success in the organization. You've also got a systematic way now to approach business success. And so business life, I know, can feel very haphazard and very chaotic at times. And this now gives you a way to move through a series of phases, whether you're just doing a new business formation piece or to think about it more comprehensively if you're further along. It's not without its drawbacks. So a couple limitations here are that it can grow stale. And so like any good system, it requires you to constantly be engaged with it and to be updating it and to spend time engaged and almost, getting your hands dirty with that piece. Some folks say it's too high level to inform executive decision-making on a daily basis. And it can be. It's intended to be kind of more of a snapshot than an actual execution or a discipline plan. The thing too is that it's pretty inward facing, so it helps to define for you or helps to walk you through how do you define that piece. And oftentimes it can miss the boat around, how do I take that and externally frame that maybe for the organization. Some folks have created a business canvas that then is just primarily externally focused, so how are we interfacing with the marketplace? What is our value proposition in terms of our mission or vision or values and what gets codified on a website, for example. So that just can be one of the main limitations there. So with that, I know I kind of rushed through all that, and I'm sure there's probably some questions here. So Rebecca, why don't I bring you back on, and I can definitely pull up the chat here as well too, and we'll make time for Q&A, and I'm definitely happy to address any and all questions and clarifications on stuff that popped up along the way.
Great, Brian, thank you so much. That was such a great presentation and such good information that'll help everyone in their business every day and also in their loan applications. So I've been able to answer some questions in the chat, but I'd love to take a few minutes if there are any specific questions about this or anything else that anyone would like to ask Brian. He is here for it. So feel free to drop them in chat, or if you raise your hand in the chat, I can take you off mute so that you can ask it out loud if that's easier for you.
And while those questions come in, Brian, just real quick, man, I appreciate you taking the time today as well in this presentation. I think out of all of the presentations I've heard on just in general of creating your business plan, of course, it's been important for us. I think you really laid it out in a way that, you know, it's like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And that's great. I think one of the challenges that we're finding in the marketplace today with our small businesses is the fact that they are extremely busy, playing the role of, you know, your plumber one day, electrician the next, psychiatrist, psychologist, because you have staff the next day. And so finding that time to put together something that seems to be so daunting can be challenging. And so I think one of the most important pieces is having somebody actually kind of lay things out in a way that does make sense and make it doable, so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And so I have a tremendous amount of empathy for our small businesses, because I was there too, putting together. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the metaphor around the sort of, you know, eating the elephant. What I like a lot is, you know, I think to achieve success in business oftentimes requires you to think about how do you manage the forest, but a lot of times we're just so busy hugging trees.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in this pandemic life, we often move from, you know, hugging one tree to the next, or hugging multiple trees simultaneously, and that's what, you know, is required for business success. And a lot of times I think we wrap up our identity in being really good at a good tree hugger. And you know, to achieve long-term success and viability, though, it requires you to develop a whole other discipline, which is the forest management piece. And so, you know, I think models like this are very effective at beginning to help you segment out the various pieces, you know, and to sit there and say, okay, you know, what requires my attention today? And, you know, you can still be the kind of person that craves that depth and wants to dive into it, but, you know, maybe you dive into an area, as you shore it up, you get it strong, and then you have to pull back out of it. So I think it's a great reminder as leaders too, that we need to not get so deep into the weeds, you know, that we lose sight of the overall health of the organization. That's what a lot of people are asking from us today is to be both. It's a lot. So at least having a system, I think, helps to organize your thought process and organize your day a little bit.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, those are both good metaphors. And we did just get a question that came into chat, Brian. The question is, so where do you find data that will support your business? For instance, what we do or attempting to do is to offer outdoor activities for folks over 50, as well as a GAP program where grandparents and grandkids go on adventures together. And where would that be fitted into the plan?
It's a great, no, Ryan just provided a resource, which is great. So this is where, you know, I think one of the key disciplines for executive success is going to be your ability to monitor macro trends, you know, and this is where I think you need to build a practice that, you know, is maybe a little bit separate from the canvas itself, but, you know, some of this can go into your customer segments, you know, understanding the different intelligence pieces around those different segments. And so, you know, you've got a couple of different segments that you threw in here as well too. And so what's going to be your competitive intelligence? What's going to be your macro trends around, you know, some of those different segments? Who are the organizations that they're kind of grappling with, you know? So that's kind of where I would slice that in, but I think also just building that discipline as a leader to make sure that you are at a higher level monitoring the trends that are happening there, and that the trends are changing. There are a number of different sources that are out there. You know, sometimes getting with local university libraries to get access to some of these journal databases. I'm not talking about journal articles, but there are a number of different services that are out there that are ones that monitor macro trends for you. And so depending on what your industry is you can be, engaged in looking at, kind of this is where we see the community going, but this is also where I think your intelligence around each individual customer segment really pays off. And so you understand, you've got your personas, you've got your archetypes around those different personas, and then you can understand kind of what does the next 5 to 10 to 15 years look like around some of those trends. It's a great question.
I almost want to take back that post, because I think that the answer is better than the post that I did about census data around business economy and small businesses and so forth.
Yeah, I've got a couple of different resources that are not coming to my immediate attention, but I will look for that, and maybe we can send that out to the folks afterwards.
Yeah, any resources you want to provide, we'll be sending out the slides as well as this recording to everyone who registered and attended. So please feel free to send those over to us so we can get them out to the group. Any other questions? If not, we will let everyone go on with their Tuesday evening. I've dropped the link in for the waitlist again. If you get on here, you'll hear updates about our loan application, and you'll find out as soon as it opens. I've also dropped the link a few times to our business advisor. So if you do have any other questions about this, about financial documentation, about any business or operational entities, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we'll connect you with someone who can help. So with that, thank you, Brian, so much for being here. Really, really appreciate your time and your knowledge. And we will get this out to everyone. And I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, guys.
Take care, everybody.